Hi, my name is Frederick Creamer. In this video, we will be discussing the interactions between organisms and their environment. Before we can discuss organisms and their environment, let's talk about the factors that affect organisms in their environment. Those factors are the abiotic and biotic factors. Abiotic factors are non-living factors that affect living organisms. Those factors are things such as environmental factors, where we have a habitat such as a pond, a lake, a desert. Or we have things such as the weather, where you have climate change, you have rain, you have cloud coverage. You have all the environmental parameters that can affect a specific organism. And then you have the organism, which is under the domain of the biotic factors, where you have your plants, your animals, your fungi, your bacteria, your protists. Biotic and abiotic factors combine to actually create a living system, which is what we know as an ecosystem, where you have organisms interacting with each other in a specific environment. There are certain things that affect an ecosystem, such as pollution, such as runoff, nutrient runoff into lakes and rivers and streams. These types of damages done to the ecosystem can have a negative impact on the organisms. Organisms live in a specialized area where evolution and advancement and symbiosis can take place, and this is more commonly known as a niche. A niche is known as your predator and prey. A niche contains your predator and prey interactions. It contains your lions. It contains your hunter-gatherer, which is where humans would be placed under. It also contains your herbivores like deers. It contains your parasites like the roundworms. It also contains your scavengers such as vultures. Within an ecosystem and within a niche, you have, as I've stated before, specific interactions that occur between those specific organisms. One interaction that we all are very used to is predator and prey interactions. We know that a predator is an organism that devours or that eats another organism. Predator and prey have a type of relationship that works together. You can't have one without the other. They work in a symbiotic relationship. There are other interactions such as mutualistic interactions, where you have two organisms that are benefiting from one another. You have a interaction, a competitive interaction, where you have two organisms that are competing for space. They are competing for shelter and food and different resources. You also have a parasitic interaction, where you have one organism, usually the host, that is taking over another organism and is feeding off from the nutrients and all the essential things that it needs to live and to prosper, while you have the other organism, on the other hand, which is being hurt by this type of relationship. Organisms compete for space. Organisms compete for shelter, and also they compete for natural resources. But there are other factors which affect organisms and their interactions with the environment. And those factors can be seen in runoff from sewage plants. You can also see these things from air pollution. You can see a lot of the human interactions, the human damage that is left behind, which is destroying our natural ecosystems. You have different organisms and you have different species and different animals and environments that are paying the price for our mistakes. They are paying the price for our involvement when we're building factories, when we're building shopping centers, when we're building complexes that ultimately destroy or ultimately invade an organism's territory, an organism ecosystem, and you are disrupting the balance within that ecosystem. You're disrupting the natural flow of energy. You're disrupting the natural cycle of nutrients within an ecosystem when we are adding and building and tearing down forests and polluting streams where we have different species of fish and other animals that are living there. These interactions can be best seen in today's society in relation to a article on the restoration of the Chesapeake Bay, the Potomac River within the Chesapeake Bay is one of the major estuaries in the Chesapeake Bay. And the problem that they were facing is you had excessive nutrients that were running into the river, and there were also pollutants that were polluting a lot of the submerged organisms that were within the river. And the organisms within the river were being affected by this pollution, were being affected by the sewage plants that were having that runoff come into the river. And also one of the major issues that they found that contributed to the decline in the submerged anthropogenic vertebrates or organisms within that specific area of the Chesapeake Bay was example of eutrophication, where you had algal epiphytes that were preventing a lot of the SAV organisms from getting the light, the sunlight, direct sunlight. You had excessive algae that was blocking the sunlight. That means that the organisms and the plants were not going through the process of photosynthesis. And eventually you had hypoxia setting in, which is lack of oxygen. And then you ultimately have the ecosystem being destroyed. And so the methodology that they used in this specific experiment was an analysis of species-specific interactions within their data, and they took different samples from the water in the Chesapeake Bay. They took different samples from the organisms, and they saw a trend, and they were able to see that if you reduce the amount of nutrients that were being poured into the water, and you cut down on the amount of pollution and sewage and outside sources of contaminants that were being flooded into the river, we saw that the restoration of the river actually over a period of time was able to restore itself. And their recommendations for future studies are to continue to analyze these different changes, or to continue to analyze the interactions within that ecosystem of the Chesapeake Bay, and to continue to explore what other factors could affect those organisms within the Chesapeake Bay, what other factors were having a negative impact on that specific ecosystem. And in looking at this, we can see that humans have a direct impact on ecosystems. Humans have a direct relationship, well, not even a relationship, but they have a direct influence on the sustainability of these ecosystems and the organisms that live there. And we can see that this is important in educating a lot of our students. We can see that this is important for students, especially in the K through 12 education levels, to know the importance of the environment and the relationships and interactions with the organisms. Therefore, we don't have incidents such as the Chesapeake Bay, and we don't have incidents such as Yellowstone Park, where we took away one of the keystone species, and the entire ecosystem had a detrimental decline. And that is why it is important for us to know about organisms and their interactions with their environment.